So today is Wednesday, February 3rd. Oh my gosh. We are continuing talking about Kairos and the rhetorical situation. I need to mention, I just today, I was looking at the way I have the schedule set up for next week. And I made a little bit of changes. The biggest change is I changed the blog activity to the 10th, because the idea is to apply ideas of Kairos and genre to the blog. And I really didn't have it scheduled for us to talk about genre until the 10th. And so I thought that was not so wise. So I changed that to the 10th, and then I reordered the reading materials for next week. And I would like you to read for Monday the textbook chapter on genre and Amy Devitt's blog on genres. You can read the rest of it as well, but for sure read those two pieces. And just as long as we're talking about what happens next week will be the end of this introductory section on genre, on Kairos and the rhetorical situation. So we'll be having a quiz. It will focus on the content of chapters 1 and 2, and it will be available on Thursday of next week through Sunday. And it is an open book test, and you will need to have read the book to know what you're doing. And I actually will put pages to sort of point you in the right direction. And to remind you, I've put a PDF of the book in the course drive in case you don't have your book yet. But then the week after that, which is the week of Valentine's Day, I will not make a copy of chapter 3. We'll be on chapter 3, and you'll definitely need the book by then. Who just came? Oh, hi, Talia.
Morning.
Let's see if that's all the rhetorical. Oh, the other preliminary information I needed to tell you was that I'm trying to figure out somehow to do an attendance thing in Blackboard so that you will know if I'm missing anything from you. And basically, I marked on my paper version. Let's see. Oh, there we are. On my paper version, I have everybody's name down, and I guess that's right. I have everybody's name down, and I just mark P for present or Q for taking the quiz. But I'd like to have something listed so you can see it, and if you know that I'm, so you'll know if I'm missing something. And so you may see weird things because I haven't quite figured out how to do it how to have it do more than one column. And also I don't want all these hundreds of, I don't know. Anyway, I'm still working on it. Just ignore it if it shows up in your grade book. And I have graded all the blogs, and if you haven't, you should go take a look at anything I said, which is pretty minimal. But what you do is well, let's see, you can get the grade both. Yeah. So you click on your own, and you will see the grade, and then view rubric, and you'll see what it's in there. And if I've made any comments, you'll see there. And you can also get this through my grades, and you click on the view rubric of the, it doesn't allow me to show the grade in my student view. I wanted to say one other preliminary thing. Something odd is going on with the interface between Google Documents and Blackboard. And I sent an email, or I put comments on some of you to see if you can switch it, because some of them are no longer allowing me to make comments. So this is how it comes up, and also it comes up showing in Blackboard instead of in Google Docs. And I mean, so I had just attached the syllabus. And I think it has to do with the way they integrate with Google Drive, which has never worked quite right. And I think it looks like they might have tried to fix it. And so it sort of works. So I don't recommend, when you're attaching something from a Google Doc, using the little interface with it that says Google Drive. But I don't really know enough about it right now. So that's just what I'm saying. And I have my handy dandy helper over at STAR, the Blackbird support office, working on this to try to help me. Let's see. Yeah, Aaliyah, I sent you an email or a comment about that. So you might check into it. Okay, so today we're going to continue on talking about the rhetorical situation. And we're going to pick up on what we were talking about yesterday or Monday about kairos. And I think it's helpful to think about the two different views, two different words that they had for time in classical Greek times, where chronos is sort of linear time, sort of absolute concrete time that happens second by second. And kairos, on the other hand, is what we're talking about. And that has more to do with a sense of time, a perception of time. And somewhere I read that it's thinking about time as moments, not seconds. And that, I think, is a really good way of thinking about it, because a moment is not a absolute sense of time like a second is. A second is a second, whatever, 1/60th of a minute. But a moment is something that might be slower or longer, or it sort of gets meaning with you, with it. And that's the type of time we're talking about with Kairos. Another way of comparing them is qualitative versus quantitative time. So chronos is the actual quantity of time. It is, again, as I said, 1/60th of a minute is a second. But a qualitative sense of time is where you're evaluating the time, where it has some kind of intensity. And, we all talk about these moments that are just really, really important to us. And it's as if time stopped kind of idea. So Kairos carries some of that idea. Now, what does that all have to do with rhetoric? So I have here a good video from YouTube that I thought was good.
To understand Kairos in its fullest extent, it is productive to start with the meaning of chronos, or time. Chronos is the neutral, linear time where events have the potential to occur. Kairos, on the other hand, is defined as the right time and in the right measure. The word originated in the classical Greek era, and many saw it as the heart of philosophy or one of the laws of nature. Aristotle's quote captures the essence of what Kairos is. Anybody can become angry, but to be angry with the right person and to the right degree and the right time for the right purpose is another matter. As a rhetorical tool, Kairos involves the right context or atmosphere of when to speak. People would argue, for example, that Abraham Lincoln and Martin Luther King Jr. gave their famous speeches in the midst of crucial events, which is why they moved people in a particular way. In another sense, Kairos is used multiple times in the New Testament to denote God's perfect timing. It is not responding or reacting to situations, but rather creating new spaces within Chronos through revelation. Richard Crosby argues that Martin Luther King Jr. redefines time and views Kairos as less logical and more as divine inspiration. To borrow from Eminem, we might even say that Kairos is that once-in-a-lifetime moment to act. James L. Kenevi argues that Kairos operates in every aspect of life. When is the right time to ask a girl out? In sports, when is the right time for a certain pitch? There is no place where timing and measure are not important. It is the window of opportunity through which we act. Kenevi also argues that Kairos is sometimes in the hands of the rhetor, but sometimes not. For example, the rhetor can control when to speak, but cannot control the context in which he is speaking. In other words, the rhetor must choose the right time and context to place his or her words. For example, at a 4th of July celebration, people are less likely to be moved by anti-American speeches than on a different day where people are gathered for a different cause. So rhetoricians ask, what prompted someone to act or speak? This is complicated because some people may think they are operating at the right time and in the proper measure, but their words may or may not have the desired impact. So looking at some examples of Kairos in the context of immigration, one might be the documentary Fear and Learning at Hoover Elementary, which produced interviews from different viewpoints in the context of heightened anxiety about immigration, and it placed particular scenes at particular moments to prove a point, like the revealing of the woman who voted for Proposition 187 after initially showing her against it. It may even be said that Kairos is used as a weapon. Do some leaders use the fear of the people to advance their own agenda? I would argue yes. In the immigration conversation, visual rhetoric and particular words are utilized as windows of opportunity to pass laws and paint immigrants in a negative light. Kairos is viewed as a lost art in rhetoric, but it is important to bring back the concept so that we reconsider the time and the measure in which we speak or act to move an audience.
So a lot of what we were talking about in last class with relation to the Black Lives Matter movement and the killing of George Floyd kind of relates to specifically what they said in that, what she said in that video. So Black Lives Matter movement has been around for a while. And the concern about inappropriate behavior by the police against individual Black, usually men, but there, of course, were a few women, has been happening for a while. But something about the moment in time of the incident with George Floyd in May 2020 really made his statement, made his killing a rhetorical act that somehow moved people forward. And so they have found that many people have changed their viewpoint about police brutality against Black people post George Floyd. Many white people have come to realize what was going on when they did not realize before. Now, many Black people may have already realized it, but the action really changed public sentiment. And one of the reasons why how we see how the change of sentiment is that when with sports players taking a knee, where before Kaepernick was sort of an outcast and denigrated for what he was doing, there's like a tipping point over so that somehow he becomes more of a hero and other people feel free to move into it. And so that thinking about that kind of timing of things is thinking about Kairos. And anytime you have any kind of rhetoric, and rhetoric is almost everything. I mean, any type of communication is rhetoric, as I've been talking about earlier. There has to be good timing for it. I showed you this yesterday, or Monday rather, but I want to emphasize. So we have the forelock that he has, and this is where the saying, sees time by the forelock. So timing is sometimes a matter of seizing the timing, of recognizing that this is the time to speak. This is the time to do it this way. Sometimes it's also a matter of saying, well, given this moment in time, this is how I need to speak, which are slightly different kinds of issues. And so I've been emphasizing this pair of words, occasion, opportunity, which is talked about in the text on page 9. So it is a literal occasion. So as a reader yourselves, you have to be aware of what is the actual occasion, the timing of whatever you're doing. So if you submit a paper in class, there is a certain time when you're supposed to submit it. I mean, deadlines memorialize this timing issue. If you turn it in after the course is over, it may be too late for you to have any impact on it. So every kind of communication, both banal and important, there is this issue of the actual occasion for the discourse. So one of the things I'm asking you to do, of course, is to write this opinion piece and then change it as we go through to think about the occasion, all the different, apply all the concepts to it. So this first thing that you're going to have to do is think about, okay, what's going to be the occasion that I will present this, write this, deliver this, send this, whatever. Whatever you end up doing is going to depend on the verb. The verb you use is going to depend on whatever you end up doing. And since this is a class, you can actually make something up. So you can pretend you have some kind of an occasion to do this. So if you were to talk about something that you decide that your family all needs to hear, you could decide that you're going to have a family get together and you'll somehow say this or share this. Or you can pick up on things that are actually in existence. So the literal occasion, but also Kairos has to do with the opportunity. And that picks up this idea of taking advantage of the situation as it presents itself and somehow knowing how to say the right thing at the right time. And as we've thought about, timing is both made and given. So you create the right timing or you are given certain timing. And so you can think about writing something that is appropriate for the time. And this is something you can think about with respect to anything, what you write, or great rhetoricians. Abraham Lincoln giving the Emancipation Proclamation, that is something that is appropriate for the time because they've decided to do this, and he announces it at that particular time. But also, and with great speeches, this often happens. Timing is a matter of writing something that you feel people need at that time. And so you can, like Martin Luther King does in the letter from Birmingham jail, his audience, the white ministers who are basically moderate ministers who support him, but who feel like he's being he's moving too fast, and he's too, they are advocating for patience. He ends up convincing them, using his speech or his letter to try to convince them that it is what they need for the time and what connects to their religious values. Again, this has to do with both the banal and the highly serious. Here is another video to look at.
Business.
It says business meetings.
Business.
How do I get people to listen to me?
Oh yeah, that can be amazingly hard, especially for women, but for a lot of men as well. The best thing to do, and this is something I actually mentioned in the book because Stalin did it and rose to power as a
He's
result.
definitely a role model.
Yeah, well, you can use this for good purposes too.
Okay, good.
So what he would do, and what you can do, and it totally works, I've been doing it for years, is shut up. And through much of the meeting, don't say anything. And then toward the end, when things start to peter out a little bit, you often will start getting a little bit of lapses and silences. You hope that there's enough time in the meeting to do this. That's when you weigh in. And instead of weighing in with your opinion, you be an amalgamator. You know what amalgamator is? Amalgamator in social media is someone who like takes, like
Yeah.
George Takei will do this, take what other people are doing and put it in a new light, package it. That's what you do. So the way to be an amalgamator in a meeting is to say, here's what I'm hearing. Here's what I think people are saying. And then express your opinion. You're basically summing up what they say. And you can't be too obvious about that. And you do have to acknowledge other people's opinion too. Here's what I'm hearing. Which even if you don't express your own opinion, you can gain power that way because people will look to you as kind of a leader. As someone's listening to everybody and packaging and making sense of it, you become the wise man or woman in the room. And what'll happen, this happened with Stalin, is that if you meet with the same people over and over again, which often you do in a company, people will start to look to you at the end of the meeting to see, like Christina, wrap things up for us. They may not say that, but they're going to look to you. It's going to be a habit at the end of every meeting. You become an amalgamator, a leader, and life goes on so much better from there.
Very nice. And with that, we will shut up. This is Argue Lab. Thank you for arguing and leave your questions, comments, concerns below.
No, this is an argument. Yes, it is. No, it isn't. It's just contradiction. No, it isn't. Yes, it is. It is not.
How many of you feel that you're good in meetings, that you're able to get people to listen to you? No?
Sometimes. I guess it depends on the subject. I mean, if it's something I'm not enthusiastic in, it's hard to get someone else as enthusiastic about it,
Have you ever noticed anybody who does what they were talking about in Argue Lab?
I don't know.
Well, okay, so next meeting everybody is at, pay attention to the timing of when people say things. And to the extent to which the timing affects how people respond and what they take away. So one of the points that he's making is wait to the end. And that makes some sense. You're able to amalgamate everything towards the end. And also it's the thing that people take away from the meeting. It's the last thing that people hear. But also one of the things he's recommending is silence. And actually thinking about how silence is a rhetorical act is also part of timing. And so when to speak and when not to speak. Okay, what I have here, a thumbnail video, a small active speaker video. This is basically what I'd like to spend most of the rest of class talking about, is this diagram from the textbook. And it's an expansion of the rhetorical triangle. It's made into a circle. We'll call it the rhetorical circle. And I want to spend a little time actually paying attention to it, looking at it, thinking about what it means. So rhetoric was developed in a time of oral communication before writing was even thought about, and certainly before writing was widely used or even generally used. And so a lot of what the classical rhetoricians are talking about is always about oral person-to-person communication. And in that situation, you have a speaker and an addressee, and that immediate back and forth possibility of the speaker or of the speech affects, some of the principles that they develop for good rhetoric at that time. When you get into the time of text, so the oral situation is just these three words in the situation. Now, sometimes there might be a text of the oral situation, and that's why we sometimes have speeches from the classical period, and of course, in the modern period, we have texts all the time of the speaking period. But that's the oral communication is just these three things surrounded, and that's where this big circle is, by the occasion. So there's always going to be an actual occasion where it happens. And then presuppositions. Does anybody have a sense of what presuppositions are?
Like thoughts and ideas you might already have before, like just kind of in the background of the speech happening.
Yeah, and whose presuppositions?
Would it be the audience?
It would be the audience, and it would be the speaker as well. So it's both. And one of the key ideas of rhetoric are that you need to be aware of the presuppositions that your audience has. One, so on some occasions, you don't need to explain things that they already know. You've heard the saying, that you're speaking to the choir. It's, kind of a waste of energy. That's an example of where your presuppositions and your audience presuppositions are identical, and there's really no need to go into all this because you're speaking to the choir that already believes it. So there's got to be some kind of relationship of presuppositions. There's got to be some kind of overlap of presuppositions between the speaker and the audience, or else you're not going to get anywhere. But there's probably going to be some area where there's not. But becoming aware of presuppositions in the speech is really important. Sometimes one can articulate those presuppositions, and sometimes one can't. There are so many values that we have that that are tacit values. The word tacit's really helpful there. It's unspoken, sort of below the surface, but definitely there. And when we start talking about argumentation, that will become really important because because you can't argue every single step of a logical argument. If you were a philosopher analyzing a logical argument, you could write that all out. But when you're convincing people in a speech or a written argument, you don't want to have to specify every single step along the way. So you rely on presuppositions. A very obvious, easy example is one where I say to my son, you need to clean up your room because grandma's coming. What is the presupposition that you must have to be convinced by that, for my son to be convinced by that? If my son says, so what if grandma's coming? What's that saying he doesn't share? What presupposition does he not share?
that a space should be clean for guests.
Yeah, that it, you know, it matters that guests, as particularly his grandmother, care about the neatness of it. And we have presuppositions floating around all the time. And, you know, there's lots of humorous cartoons and comics and stuff where people, you know, these floating presuppositions are in the air of what they think they say and what they don't. So that's why we have this, this circle here. So there's this literal occasion and presuppositions, and they're sort of floating in the air and they're all surrounded. Then moving out of the original box, we have an implied reader and an intended audience. So, well, actually, let's move all the way out. So this is a textualized situation where somebody is writing something that is a rhetorical act. And you have an actual reader, and the authors use the term reader so that they can, as a shorthand, so they don't have to say a writer or speaker or radio host or whatever, but whoever is delivering the message. And the actual reader. And when you are writing something, there's an actual person who's written it and an actual person who's reading it. But we can also talk about implied reader and an intended audience. So what is an implied reader? When you write something, even if it is an autobiography, it is not just you who is writing all this. When you write it, you create a narrative voice that is part of the construct that you've made. You see this in fiction all the time, where there's a narrator that's actually created, and then there's a writer behind it. And it's really obvious that the writer behind the narrator are two separate things. But even if you're writing a nonfiction piece, a piece of technical writing, you know, a blog post, the you that shows up in the text is not exactly the same as the you out there who actually speaks, because you are creating an image of yourself through your writing. And like I say, it's a continuum how far away the implied reader is from the actual reader. So in many cases, the implied reader is very similar, very close to the actual reader. But in other situations, the example of the unreliable narrator, it's very far away. That is one of the rhetorical strategies actually that you have to change your voice, to change the sense of the person who is speaking when you are writing. This sounds a little complicated, but that's why I really like this diagram, because I think it helps it. When you are writing, you also have an actual reader and an intended audience. And the difference between that we see a lot of times, because there are often multiple readers involved in something. And the example of Martin Luther King's Birmingham jail letter is a good example that there's this actual readers, these, whoops. This is too sensitive. These actual readers, the people in the journal that he published this in, who actually read it, but he wrote it so that the intended audience was these ministers and also sort of the American population as a whole. And not only did he write an intended, so that this intended audience would read it, this other audience other than the actual one, he was trying to create a type of point of view in that audience so that his intended audience was the audience that believed in the Christian values of supporting basically of equality, and so he basically made them into that audience, or he invoked that audience as he wrote it. Now this is pretty complicated, so let me stop and make sure everybody understands what we're talking about here. Can anybody think of a situation where something you wrote, there was a difference between you as the actual writer and the sort of the sense of yourself that you were trying to convey, the implied writer that you created?
So I've, like, over the past few years, I've worked on like a fantasy book, and I'll focus on the perspective of a particular character. And while I'm writing from that character's point of view, it's actually me writing it. So
Yeah, so the you're the actual writer, but you have an implied writer in this character who is the perspective. Are they the are you using third person or first person when you're in the voice of the other?
I use third person.
Okay, so but it's from that perspective. And then if you could have, let's say if you use the first person of that character, then you'd have like a implied narrator or a narrator that is internal. So you're basically, here's you out there and you're creating these things going through. Now, what's your intended, has anybody had a chance to read this? Do you post this?
I share it with like it's kind of not finished yet, so like I'll ask like family or friends, like, is this good? But I guess the intended audience would be like fantasy readers of, like the genre.
Yeah. So I mean, for sure, you're intending a certain type of group. That's one of the things about genre. Thinking about genre is that when you think about a genre, that implies an intended audience usually. We'll talk about genre next week. So genre ends up being like everything with that. And then when you ask your family to read it, or, supportive friends, clearly there's a difference between an actual reader and the intended reader. And, your purpose of having an actual reader read it may be to give you feedback, be different than the purposes that you hope to happen with the intended audience. That's a great example. Has anybody else ever had, how about, has anybody written memoirs or more personal writing?
I have.
Yeah. Is the speaker, the writer in your memoir the same, your actual you, Aaliyah? Is it the same as the implied writer in the memoir?
I'd like to think so.
Do you have a sense that there's a sort of a construct you're creating at all?
No, I think like it's pretty straightforward. I write as myself.
Uh-huh. Has anybody ever had somebody say about your own writing or read this about somebody else's? This just sounds just like you. People say to me, actually, when they read some of my writing, this doesn't sound like you. So, like I said, there is a continuum. The sort of persona that I have in writing is sort of different from the persona that I have in real life. It just, and I don't know how conscious I am of this, but it's definitely something I end up doing, and it's partly partly because you can, because writing allows you to think things through and change things and craft how you want to appear in a way that might be different from others. And how about
I've written stuff and had to go back with it because I'd like look at it, I'm like, wow, this is really passive aggressive. I mean, I get it, but okay, let's just redo that and clean it up a little. But obviously it's mostly work memos, but it cracks me up like, that's not going to get an HR call. Let's quickly just fix this.
yeah, there's a difference between, well, in that case, it sounds like you're allowing some part of irritation to somehow come through.
I think part of it is what I really want to say, and then it's like, well, let's just fix that.
And writing is you only need to say some part of things. Has anybody ever noticed a disjunction between an actual reader and an intended audience of something that you've written?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. What was that?
Has anybody ever noticed a disjunction between an actual and an intended audience of something you've written? Sometimes I think people write things that, there is no audience yet for it. They're waiting for the time for people to hear it. So as you're thinking about your persuasion piece, these are the things you're going to want to be thinking about. So what will be the occasion that this material will be written or given or spoken or whatever? Will there be, will it be an oral situation or a written situation? And, what will be the whole context around it? So occasion and presuppositions and this circle are trying to convey this sort of the whole the context around it. Occasion being sort of the environmental context, and presuppositions being the more internal context of people's ideas and values. So that's something to think about. At the end of chapter 2, where it starts talking about how do you do analysis of rhetorical situation and kairos, there's a section on pages starting at page 35, talking about these terms. So occasion we've been talking about. Exigence is talked about in the book. Exigence has to do with sort of the triggering thing of an occasion. So occasion might be sort of passive, but exigence is a little bit more active, some kind of triggering thing. You know, a person dies, and so you write remembrances or a funeral oration or something. That death is an exigence that triggers, elicits the rhetorical act. I've been saying that George Floyd's killing in May 2020 was an exigence for sort of a growth in the Black Lives Matter movement and the interest in equality and the problems of the police and people of color. So all of these they all overlap. So, you know, there's never an exact thing that it means this or that, but occasion and exigence have to do with the thing that's you know, that this window of opportunity of kairos that happens. Historical and cultural context is a little more clear, you know, and that has to do with you know, what is going on historically. Imagine if we are learning about George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter 20 years from now. So imagine you were in high school 20 years from now. That means that you were barely alive, if that, when the George Floyd event happened. And so in order to understand that, you'd have to know a lot about the historical context, cultural context that right now we're living through, but in a later time, people are not. That little video about kairos that used the example from California immigration and proposition something, I had to look up, you know, what this California proposition was because I had no idea. So the video did in fact rely on your knowing the historical context of that particular time, which was not too long ago, 2017, but in California. And so it was not something that was part of my real knowledge. Forum and genre, we're going to be talking a little bit more about. Forum can sometimes be like a medium, and then genre and forum tend to overlap. But a forum might be a newspaper, a blog, you know, a speech at at a public protest, you know, a student paper. So that the type of platform sort of, and it overlaps also with medium these days because there's so many different media that allow us to do things. You know, Twitter or Facebook or any particular social media platform, each of these are fora, I think that's the plural. And then genre relates to that, that is that a particular forum leads to a particular genre. So if you are publishing on Twitter, there is the genre of the Twitter tweet, and you have to produce your rhetoric in that genre. I don't think they'll let you produce something not in that genre. So the technology even constrains you. There are other ways of constraining you. You know, if a student, if a student in a discussion just suddenly stands up and starts giving this fully fleshed online speech, that would be, the forum would be the class, and the genre would be inappropriate for that forum. So the genre needs to be appropriate for the particular forum. And so all of these things are things that you're going to have to kind of think about when you're working on your paper. So I would like to stop. I guess we'll leave that there. And ask you, have you guys had any thoughts about how you might apply Kairos and rhetorical situation to your opinion pieces? Tell you what, let's go around and each say what we're writing about. I am going to have you look at, you are allowed to look at each other's blogs and comment. And in fact, I will ask you to do that next week. But why don't we hear from each of you what you're writing about and just some ideas about Kairos and rhetorical situation as they apply to that. Does anybody want to volunteer, or should I just go around do the boxes on my screen? Well, Micah, you're at the top.
Yay. So I'm going to stick with writing about replacing actors with CGI versions, mostly in relation to like once the actor's already passed, like is it ethical to like bring them back to life and keep using them, or do you recast, or do you just quietly kill the character off screen somewhere? I don't know. Like I said, I think they're kind of soulless looking. They're kind of creepy looking. I don't particularly like them. And I think there are a bunch of ethics behind it. I mean, I know eventually it's up to the estate to decide if they want to use that person's likeliness, but I don't know. I feel like in the future it can cause a lot of issues.
So you've actually pointed out there are at least three pieces of your argument that you're thinking about. One is just the aesthetics of it. You think it looks stupid or bad. One is the ethics, and one is the legal.
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
And the legal stuff I'm still looking up anyways, just because I got curious about it. The more people were talking about, you know, the new Black Panther movie, and like, are they going to recast him, or are they going to just kill him off? Or I don't think they were going to recast him anyways. I think they decided against that, but I don't know. It's just interesting, especially with technology always getting better and better. I mean, they're looking not as soulless, but they're still, you can still clearly tell it's not a real person.
So, what might be the rhetorical situation that you could see presenting this? You just mentioned something that relates to Kairos, right?
I don't know, did I? Because I might have done it and inadvertently not realized it.
Okay, so the Black Panther situation, does everybody know? When she said the Black Panther situation, did anybody go, huh? Probably not. Does everybody knows exactly what she meant? So this piece of time right now, this is a particularly interesting question, right? Because of the Black Panther actor's death, right at a time when we would hope that there's going to be another Black Panther movie. So just being aware of that may help you think about how you go about doing this. Now, if you want this piece, whatever this piece is, to only apply right now, that's fine. You focus on these characters right now. But if you want somebody to be able to read this later on, there might need to be some explaining.
Well, the nice part is there's plenty of examples of doing this in the past and it not necessarily looking really good. And then, of course, I think there was another one I was reading about using James Dean, actually. I forgot what it was. I haven't gotten to read the whole article, but it's pretty recent, actually, where they talk about like using James Dean in another movie. And I'm just like, okay.
There are probably James Dean impersonators, kind of like there were Presley.
Oh, no, they're CGIing him in or something crazy. Okay.
Yeah. So what kind of rhetorical situation might you make this argument?
I have no clue yet. I'm still debating because there's a couple of different ways you can go with it.
Thinking about form and genre will probably help you there.
Yeah, because I could easily write an ethics piece about it, or I can turn it into persuasive to go against it. So, I mean.
Well, so like if you did an ethics piece, what rhetorical situation might you have for that?
I guess focusing on like, should you be allowed to do that? Because I mean, you can't get the actor's actual consent. I mean, you're relying on the estate, and what if the actor did not want this? So is it going to have to be a thing that they're going to have to include in their wills from here on out? Like, hey, don't use my likeliness for these causes.
So it sounds like one possibility is a real academic kind of piece that explores the ethical and legal kinds of ramifications of it. Yeah. A whole different kind of rhetorical situation might be more writing to fans of people who are being CGI'd and, you know, kind of appealing to them to do something about it. So you could see there'd be two very different styles of writing, two very different kinds of approaches, depending on how you thought about doing that. How about you, Anna? What are you thinking of doing? Remind me.
So I'm writing about like in media, like whether that be books or movies or TV shows, like strong female characters.
Oh yeah, now I remember.
How like sometimes there are occasions where it's just like, you know, they may just have a woman, you know, just doing the stuff that male superheroes do, you know, like wielding weapons, but then their personality isn't really as explored. And so I guess I talk about how it's more important to have like a character with personality and goals and even flaws so that they're relatable. But then I have had trouble like thinking like of a good rhetorical situation.
Does anybody have an idea of what kind of rhetorical situation she might envision for this?
I mean, there's a couple of different ways you can go with that. I mean, I know a lot of people have been complaining, like, we've been getting better female characters than before in the media. It's mainly, let's just say it, they were afraid, execs were afraid it wasn't going to make enough money. And we have movies like Supergirl and that one Catwoman movie we can thank for that. But is it getting to the point where it's turning into pandering now? There's one argument I've heard over and over again. And then, I don't know. There's been moments where I've watched movies, I'm like, okay, she's, doing stuff actually, and you're like rooting for her, but then the personality flaws, or maybe that just makes her a real person. I don't know. But I don't know. There's a bunch of different ways you can go with that. So.
Yeah.
Are there particular media that you're interested in? Movies, books, I mean.
Or just a broad thing of it. Because,
Maybe,
I mean, I'm not really, I'm more of a
I'm-
film person. I'll just say it. I like film.
I guess I'm kind of focusing on movies. I mean, some of them are based on books, originally, but I guess my main focus is movies. So, and I know like in the new Star Wars movies, like there's been some criticism of Rey, like while she is a Jedi, she's like, sometimes she just kind of like moves the plot forward and doesn't really fight it. So there's been criticism of that. So I know that could be an example.
So one of the things that, you can narrow to a very particular subset of movies even, and then, make the rhetorical situation be people who are familiar and care about those movies. So, you're interested in fantasy fiction.
Or James and Judy kind of have the same background, or just
somebody talking here with, I guess that's somebody else. So you're interested in fantasy fiction. You might be more interested in fantasy superhero movies too, and be writing into people who are also interested in that and concerned about it. I mean, it definitely is, and thinking about Kairos, it's definitely the case that there has been an additional focus on women. And so you're thinking of, this is a good question to ask. Yes, it's great. There's more women, more major characters. Are the actresses making as much money? I doubt it. But anyway, there are increased major characters that are female. But then the question is it just sort of superficial, or is it a really substantial kind of thing? So the timing makes some sense like that. I didn't think of myself as growing up in a period of time when women were not given as many opportunities as men. But when I hear and think back, I realize that there were so few images of women doing things that I was growing up, and I didn't even realize it. I was particularly aware of that when hearing all the things about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and realizing that at the time that I graduated from college, most law schools were just barely female, and every image of a lawyer that I ever saw was of male. So thinking about timing is part of that. Okay, so we don't have time to go around, but I hope you guys are beginning to see what I mean and thinking about how, what's the rhetorical situation in which you would deliver or write or provide this, post this rhetorical document, I guess is how I'll call it. All right, so just as a reminder where we are. Next week, we're going to talk about genre in the rhetorical situation. There's not that much in the textbook about genre, and so I've added additional things. Whoops. And be sure to at least read these first two things for Monday, and then realize that I've changed this assignment to the 10th, which is great. Then starting on the 11th will be the quiz. Any questions?
No, ma'am.
Let's see. Good. Have a great rest of the week and weekend. My family lives up in New York and Boston. They had 2 feet of snow.
Oh my goodness.
Funny. All right, I will see you later.
See
Bye-bye.
ya.